extremely happy to welcome today's two guests, Arlen Reuter and Mervyn Eastman, who are going to talk today about the late life audio and radio cooperatives that they're both involved in. I think I invited them to come and speak even before the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic hit us, but certainly given everything that's happened over the last 3 months, I think the topic about which they're talking is even more pertinent. So I'm extremely interested to hear what they say and how their project's been going. So Arlen is a psychologist who's been working on issues around digital radio communication, but also other wider topics around social exclusion. So she was involved in the Centre for Aging Better scoping review with Tom Scharf on social exclusion, and has worked with other large-scale data sets, both in the UK and in Germany. Mervyn has been a prominent figure in aging research and a powerful voice for the rights of older adults for a considerable period, as a passionate advocate for better rights, quality of life for older adults, and a passionate supporter of the cooperative movement as well. I think if I were to list all his achievements, I think I would take up pretty much the entire time allocated for the webinar. I would say that most of you are probably most familiar with some of his more recent work around compassionate ageism, which again I think has been extremely powerful in the current debates on older adults under the COVID-19 crisis. And for those of you that are active on social media, you'll be aware of Mervyn's presence on Twitter as well, and he's part of the network for change agents and runs a program on East London Radio, which I was fortunate enough to be invited to talk at, which still goes down as one of my most enjoyable experiences as an academic in the last 20 years. So I'm not sure I can promise you the same, Mervyn, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what you and Arlen have been up to. So I will now turn my video off and hand over to Arlen. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the question box, and I'll be asking those of the speakers at the end of their talk. So please, over to you.
Thank you, Martin. We're very happy to be here, even though it's online. It's our first webinar, so I'm a bit excited. And I also can't see any of you, so that's also a bit strange, but I just trust that we have many friendly faces in the audience. I'm Arlen. I'm a PhD student at Open Lab at Newcastle University, so I'm based in human-computer interaction, but my background is in psychology and aging research, as Martin just said. And for my project, I'm looking at life, and in particular the role of radio in that context. So we're going to talk to you today about the later life audio and radio cooperative. Martin just said who we are, so I don't know, Mervyn, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I'd only ruin it. So I'll leave it with Martin. It was a very gracious introduction.
Okay, so we thought that I could start by telling you a little bit about the research background of this project, and then Mervyn will talk about the importance beyond research, things that we've done and why it's really important for our communities. So yeah, for the foundations, the kind of scientific background to this, we came from looking at civic participation in later life. So civic participation is active citizen participation. So for example, shaping one's community, having a voice across the city, and achieving a public good. It's often associated with volunteering, but there's quite a few different forms in which civic participation can happen. And with increasing digitalization of our society, there's actually a lot of research on how younger people use digital spaces, digital media, content creation for their civic activism, but there's really quite little work around how older people make use of that space and older people as civic stakeholders in a digital space. And when we think about the production of digital media, there's actually quite a lot of ageist stereotypes. We saw that a lot with COVID-19, for example, how older people are portrayed in the media, and so often disembodied, without personhood. You can just see some wrinkly hands But then there's also this other side that often younger producers are producing content assuming what older people might listen to or want to listen to. So there's really this kind of assumption of older people as a homogeneous group. So for us, there was the question, how can we address that? There's two ways. This is a bit more formal, this slide, but there's two ways in which the digital divide can be addressed. The very obvious one is the digital inclusion. So, for example, government trying to address access to digital services. So, for example, we can think about library classes, teaching older people how to access a government service, and these sort of things. I find that this has quite a passive connotation. So I like to focus on digital participation, which is really emphasizing on active contributions around content creation. What are older people contributing to a digital space? How are we using digital technologies as active citizens? And it's really, about that agency. Project resulted from a participatory action research project, which is quite a community-led approach to research. So it's very collaborative and democratic, often based in a community setting, and there's always a kind of cycle of planning, action, and reflection. So we go in quite a circular way of how we conduct the research, which makes it quite flexible, but also very relevant. And as part of that, I started researching in Newcastle, exploring how older people make use of radio to have a voice for their civic participation, for their activism, those sort of things. And I started working with the Older Voices team, which is the radio team from the Elders Council of Newcastle, which is an older people's forum in the city. And I really started working alongside them, exploring their workflows, how they produce the show. And I think that's something very remarkable, because the entire show is produced by older people themselves. So starting from content creation activities, what are they going to broadcast, but also the technical aspects of the broadcasts, like running the desk. And I think that this program challenged all the stereotypes that you see around age and technology, because it shows that indeed older people are producers of great content, great talk-based content. And we started to explore a little bit the challenges that the group faced, for example, digital aspects. I'm just seeing that I'm on poor audio quality. I hope it didn't cut out. But yeah, anyway, we started looking at digital aspects, really working on digitalizing some of the content so that that the content is more sustainable, that people can also listen in on demand, that there can be a discussion, online discussion around the topics. So we started working with a software which we developed in Open Lab, which the group called Radio Grabber, which basically says it all. We grab certain parts of the radio show, we edit it, and then we can upload them as kind of highlights. And this is kind of good for tracking also audience interests, but it also allows certain interviewees to just share their chat. And I think, in my opinion, what it really shows is that shifting that notion from older people as radio listeners to actually saying, here's an entire production made by older people. It's edited, it's produced, and it's done entirely by themselves. So it's really challenging those stereotypes. From that project, I started networking a bit more. I met with Sunday Radio in Manchester, and here you can just see a photo with some of their content creators visiting us in Newcastle, and we had a joint meetup in the studio, and obviously also talking to Mervyn and Age Speaks in London. And that was really the first time when we kind of thought about creating a network and looking at that networking aspect. Like, okay, there is a lot of older people out there producing content. How can we link up? And this happened last October at a radio festival, which we held in Newcastle. It was a 2-day festival where we really had some live broadcasts. You can see here Mervyn on the left, live broadcasting from the Urban Sciences building in Newcastle. We had people attending from age-friendly radio stations, of course, all the content creators, third sector organizations, some academics. So it was really quite a mix, but all with that same interest in later life radio production. And I think the majority of these 2 days was also discussing how can we launch a network, what is the network about, and how can we raise awareness of older people as creators and producers of great talk-based content. So the Later Life Audio and Radio Cooperative was born, and this is our mission. So we want to promote positive views and challenge negative views on age and aging by providing talk-based audio and radio content, which is created by a diverse group of older adults, strengthening the visibility of content created by older people, and really encourage the expansion of radio programming related to relationships between the generations. So intergenerational cohesion was also a big factor in that. And the last point we put down in our mission statement is to engage older people in broadcasting, facilitate skill development, and build communities by enabling discussions around a wide range of topics. So at this point, I want to hand over to Mervyn, because he's got some things prepared to share about that community aspect. Over to you, Mervyn.
All right, thanks very much, Arlene, and thank you, people, for joining this particular webinar. It's a privilege to have been invited, and also a privilege to sit alongside virtually Arlene. I got involved with community radio some while ago from East London Radio, and one of the messages that I was very anxious to stress, certainly in the context of Age Speak, which is an hour-long show with a single guest. Martin's made reference to it. When I first found out about Older Voices and the work that Arlene had been pioneering and working with, I was incredibly keen to have that conversation on Age Speak with Arlene. And as she's just indicated, from that conversation, we started to think very seriously around how to engage with, if you like, the broadcast radio audio industry, as well as older adults themselves. And I think the backdrop to what we were trying to achieve, both through our various programming, but also in terms of the festival and the outcome of the festival, was to take the principles behind particularly community radio, which is where East London Radio is based, so it's digital and available worldwide. And we do have a worldwide listenership. I'll just add that into the pot. One is, how can we create, how can we enhance the very principles and values underpinning radio, particularly community radio? And it seemed to me that when Arlene and I, with Ian Chambers, who is the producer and editor there at East London Radio, we wanted to say, how can we promote older adults' diversity and promote intergenerational harmony? That's one of the principles behind community radio. And we was also very keen to take the lessons of Older Voices and to be saying, how can older adults be included both in front of the mic and behind the mic in a way that actually creates and enhances, for example, age-friendly communities, and how do we encourage and enhance diversity of programme content choices and challenging the age stereotypes that are endemic within social media, within the media generally, and perhaps we could even say across society generally. So we wanted to think about how to use both Arlene's expertise, the expertise of Older Voices and older adults, and the experience of Sonda and others, including East London Radio. And I suppose we started to think about democratising the voices of older adults. because at the moment, many of the voices of older adults are sifted and filtered through, if you like, third sector organisations or even broadcasters and the media generally. How can we unfilter that? How can we get older adults to be very much engaged in talk radio as well as the more general output of audio? And I suppose by way of backdrop, behind the network, behind our various programmings, we wanted to confront the radio industry and the audio industry on how their programming and their content actually reinforces and proposes and actually produces and reinforces the myths of aging and the myths of stereotypes. Now, as you know, it's my birthday, so I'm going to talk to you now for a little bit about being a 71-year-old male, which I can't, that's what I am. And I'm thinking that there are certain myths that are generated through the narrative of radio, whether that be broadcasters. And let me add here as well that many older celebrities talking about aging, in my view, actually perpetuate the very myths and stereotypes of growing older. So, for example, we are infantilized. We are treated like children. We are considered as being listeners to, if you like, the Beatles in terms of the boomer generation. And I talk about we need to say that radio is far more than the Beatles or Rolling the Stones. And therefore, we wanted to challenge that sort of approach. And I have to say, it is endemic, absolutely endemic. We need to also be thinking around how listeners and how the media and certainly producers and content producers actually consider us as set in our ways. Now, the late Vera Lynn was constantly quoted as, you know, older adults want to listen to Vera Lynn. Well, you know, many do, but equally many don't. And it seems to me that we need to be thinking around this notion of older people cannot learn new skills. And that's why I was particularly taken with the work of Older Voices and others, and of Immediate Sonder. We are considered as sexless. How often do we see and hear on the radio older people talking about sexuality, their own sexuality? Where do I hear those stuff? Unless it's mimicked and so on and so forth. We are seen as dependent, sick, lonely, confused, and forgetful. So what we wanted to do was to challenge all those myths and many more that I could quote. And therefore, what sort of language do we need to use? What sort of vocabulary, what sort of narrative must we create and broadcast that is no longer about misrepresenting both age and particularly misrepresenting gender? So we came to it on the basis that the media and radio generally employs chronological age in which to define us. There is a shaped by prejudice, shaped by stereotypes, and shaped by discrimination against older adults. And therefore, we felt that radio has a very symbolic power, and it's an arena that exercises it. And it sets the agenda and it frames the agenda, and it's binary. So, for example, everyone was celebrating the wonderful Captain Tom as he walked around his garden, raising millions of pounds for the NHS. And that was one image that was very powerful to the public and particularly to the media. My own view was that in many ways the media manipulated and marketized. And also that we need to think about how the media portrayed, quote, the victims of COVID-19. So in the recent weeks, the very issues that we were trying to address through the festival and hopefully through the network were there in stark reality, in your face, every day, every hour. And therefore, we wanted LLARN, the Later Life Audio and Community Cooperative, as it became, and I'll say a little bit more about how we became a cooperative and why, to create different narratives and to create narratives that empower older adults and their voices. And I always put in a health check here. Arlene has heard this so many times, so you may not have done. Being 71, being an older adult activist, having spent all my career in the social care field and in, if you like, the age industry, doesn't necessarily make me right. Being a 7-year-old doesn't necessarily make you wrong. And therefore, I think we was also wanting to say, we want to encourage the voices of older adults, but we also want to be very clear that we do not want to have a network that perpetuates across the generations those age stereotypes and those assumptions we make about growing older. Do not define me by my hairless grey hair. Do not define me by my chronological age, but define me on the basis of who I am and what I want and what I am. So therefore, it was very important that the network established, if you like, its mission, which Arlene has taken you through, and what our purpose and what our aims are. And you need to remember that the network, this cooperative, is very new. We've been overwhelmed by the response that we've received through if you like, the Mixcloud platform that we're using. So I'll just finish at this point and then give Arlene a chance to come in. And that is, one is older adults have to be engaged with the production and the content of audio and radio outlets. Need to be in control of it. Need to be determining the narrative on the basis of anti-ageist approaches. And that's both as hosts, hosting a show, as well as behind, and the skills that, for example, older voices are developing and have developed around editing, around production, design, and so on and so forth. So it's about controlling production. It's also about acknowledging that older adults are able to learn those skills, should they wish, or the skills of being in front of the mic. And therefore, we celebrated the development of this new cooperative. So I think, Arlene, unless you want me to talk about the Later Life cooperative, I'm happy for you to come in and add and embellish anything that I've said.
Thank you, Mervyn. I think maybe just to mention that we originally started out as the Later Life Audio and Radio Network, but we're now becoming a cooperative. So we've been working with the principles of sociocracy to create a very equal and democratic way for the network to go forward. Did you want to add anything to that, Mervyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, because I've been engaged since I came out of better government for older people with cooperatives, Change Agents is actually a multi-stakeholder collective. I was taken with the principles and values. And when I looked at the principles and values behind community radio, I began to think very seriously about, well, who's in control of this network? Who benefits from this network? And if you like, who owns this network? And when we were in Newcastle at the 2-day festival that Arlene spoke about, we were very keen to explore the sort of network we wanted to be. And we were also very keen to know, and this is why we went for a cooperative approach, and that is that the network, now the cooperative, is owned by its members. There's no one in charge on that basis. You don't get a chair, even if it's a chair like me, mouthing off and saying, this is what we're going to do, or we have a veto. I don't like that, so you can't do it. There's no executive function in that regard. So we wanted the members of the network, of the cooperative, its later life exciting audio and radio cooperative to own it. Every member having a stake and feeling and being owners of their own network. The other principle around the cooperative movement, and this is the international cooperative principle, is that everyone has an equal say. And we had a debate, if you remember, Arlene, early on, when we went to York, around, well, how do we reflect an intergenerational approach? Are we just asking for people over the age of 50 to become members of this network? We totally agreed, no. We want anyone who is interested in later life audio and radio to be engaged, become members, but they also have an equal say. That was very important to us. It's democratic in that basis. Therefore, there's an expectation that members of the network, of the cooperative now, don't just sign up, sit back and listen to the LLARN Mixcloud platform, but are actively engaged. So we're looking at members joining the cooperative who will become part of and involved with the various circles that sociocracy actually has developed as a way of governing the cooperative. So we don't want tailgaters. We don't want people coming to us saying, oh, we've got a good idea for a program. We do want that, but it's about matching and fitting with the principles behind it. We also wanted the cooperative, the network, not to be beholden to anybody, but to be beholden to itself and its membership, so that we didn't get a situation where there's no criticism, where we began to think about, well, charities for us is not the sort of structure we want in terms of who benefits, trustees, and so on and so forth. So we wanted people to be involved with our cooperative on the basis of their independence and their involvement. Another principle of cooperation which is very pertinent for us, and particularly the likes of older voices and the work that Arlene and her colleagues have been pioneering, and that is that cooperatives are responsible in terms of its principle 5 around training and learning. We wanted this to be a training learning network, a cooperative that encourages the development of skills across the board, whatever your generation, and particularly older adults. And the other principle we wanted was to look at how far other cooperatives, now the cooperative movement, I hadn't realised until I joined it out of Better Government and we became a cooperative. And there's a little quote that I've used, which again Arlene will know, and that is that the cooperative is more than carrots and coffins. Yeah, it is far more than that. We're hoping through the network and through our cooperative to explain about that the cooperative is also about social justice, about equality. It's about confronting, if you like, all the isms that surround us, particularly ageism. And the last principle, and for me this is the most important principle, and that's principle 7. I won't bore you with my take on where we are in the cooperative in relation to this principle. That principle is care for community, of community. But often care for community can be perceived and experienced as patronising, paternalistic, rather than releasing the strength of communities. So we wanted to locate the network, the cooperative, within Principle 7. It is of the community, not just in the community. So that's how we got to a position through consultation to look at different models, different types of organisations, social enterprises, KICs, charities, or whatever. And we developed a unanimous view that we wanted to be part of the cooperative sector and part of the cooperative movement for those reasons. And so out of that, we met in York. We started to firm up the arrangements around the infrastructure that's required for the cooperative, decisions based on consent. The circles within sociocracy, it's important to recognise, do not always have to defer to some governing body. If a circle, for example, Arlene is involved in both the production circle and the marketing branding, If that circle decides to make a decision, it makes that decision. It doesn't say, oh, we've got to ask permission to do this. They are empowered to do it themselves. So its decisions are based on consent. So therefore, we are saying that we are more than carrots and coffins. We are wanting to promote radio that older people and other generations appreciate, control, own, and develop, and therefore to develop, if you like, a landscape for older people's radio, which is about pursuing the principles of democracy, access, equity in radio programming, share and learning technical skills that allow that to occur, engage with older adults in its production, promote in front and behind the mic. And finally, I'll let you free from this. That is, we want to ensure older voices are democratized. Thank you for tolerating me.
I promised Mervyn some extra speaking minutes because of his birthday, but actually I'm really glad that he just summed this up, because I could have never done it in the same way. I guess one last thing that we want to talk about is the Mixcloud. Mervyn just mentioned it. So we've kind of started with a Mixcloud, which is still called LLARN Network. So if you go to Mixcloud and type in LLARN Network, you'll find us. And this Mixcloud is really what we want to be, a hub to celebrate content that's produced by older people. We like this to be talk-based and as diverse as possible. So you can see on the right that we've had some productions that Mervyn also mentioned on Later Life and COVID-19, and we're really quite proud because some of these productions had a lot of listenings, and I think they also touched on something very important, that in the context of COVID, we don't just hear about older people, but we hear older people, we hear their opinions, we hear their experiences. So that was really one thing that we've produced, but we also have historical content, travel content, so it's really very diverse, and I think that's important to us as well. And yeah, I think I just wanted to promote that. So if you want to explore the Mixcloud, just go to Mixcloud and type in LLARN Network. And this is for now our hub, but also I think what Mervyn just said is that it's a process. So we're still working on it. We're still trying to develop other ideas. Obviously rebranding now as a cooperative, but also exploring things that we can do in this space, and we are very excited about it, and I'm kind of happy to see that other people are also excited about it. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm going to put our email here, so if you want to get in touch with us, you can just email larnnetwork@gmail.com, or you can email me or tweet or Mervyn, and we'll be very happy to take questions now, but also if you just want to be in touch, or if you want to have a chat, just feel free to contact us. I'm going to leave this up for a minute, but then when we maybe have some questions, I might take this down because I can't even see Mervyn. So I hope, I hope to hear from you.
Good, thank you. Okay, back to Martin.
Thank you so much for that fantastic and really empowering, I thought, presentation. I mean, I think all the things you said there really resonated with me as well. I think, a lot of my research is around work and retirement. So to hear you talking about older adults as producers as well as consumers, I think also resonates across a range of issues in aging later life, because I think so often older workers are seen as less productive, as just, waiting to retire. So kind of valuing their productive power in whatever they do, I think is really crucial. I mean, the other thing for me as well is not just because I'm born in Rochdale, so I always like to hear about the cooperative movement doing well, and the cooperative model being applied across a range of different areas. But again, I think that really goes to the heart of what many of us are trying to do in the research world, which is about sort of co-production as well, in terms of ensuring that kind of older adults' voices and experiences are embedded in the research that we do and the types of outputs that we produce. So it's amazing to see that as well being done in this kind of digital radio capacity. I have two questions which I will take the liberty of asking to start with, but please, people in the audience, and I see we've got a good crowd, about 30 odd people. If you have questions for either of the speakers or comments that you would like to share from your own experiences, please just put them in the question box, which is on the right hand side of your screen in the little drop down box that you have, and I will ask them of the speakers so they don't have to worry themselves about reading and talking at the same time, which I know challenges me sometimes on in these days of Zoom meetings and go-to presentations. So my first question is a practical one, and my second question really is a kind of an academic one. So firstly, how do people get involved in your network? So what is the process if there's particularly, in Wales, if we have local radio groups who want to be part of the network? And then the second question is whether you've done any evaluation of the impact on kind of health and well-being for older adults about being involved in this type of activity. So I can imagine that there's lots of, there's the positive aspect about getting people's voices out there, but there's also some personal kind of rewards as well, self-esteem, confidence, skills learning. And I know Mervyn's talked about the value of learning and training at the heart of the cooperative model. So I don't know if you could answer either of those two questions, and then we have another one that I'll read out after that.
Yeah.
Okay. Eileen, do you go first?
Yeah, I would just maybe answer the second question because I feel like it links to my research. So I think we haven't done a formal evaluation in terms of the network, but what I also found in throughout my PhD is that the kind of social aspect of being involved is really important, and nearly sometimes more important than the production process itself. But there are obvious links between, being civically active, but also socially active and health. So I think even though we haven't explored them regarding the network in particular, I think they are there. And what I have evaluated is that social aspect of having a joint goal and producing something that's of benefit to others as well. So I think it's quite rewarding.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of the first question, Martin, the people at the moment just let us know if they want to be either involved in the network or it's cooperative. We've created a database, or LLARN's created a database. We are in the process of just about clarifying the membership application. What should that contain? Are there expectations on members? We had a debate very recently at the membership and governance circle around whether we should be a subscription-based cooperative. You pay and you get your benefits. We decided to defer any decision around that for at least 12 months. I think that was a wise decision. So we're in that process of developing the membership criteria. What we are quite keen about is that members have to share the value base of the cooperative. They have to share the value base or our narrative around age and aging. We don't want to be overwhelmed by members who really are basically ageist, whatever their age. And there's a challenge there for the cooperative movement. You've heard me say this frequently. Just because you sign up to 7 principles and values of honesty and equity doesn't make you honest and equitable. So we want to be very careful. Arlene and the production team are exploring an editorial policy about what should or shouldn't be on the platform. But the key issue for us are to engage with such a wide range. And I have, through Age Speaks, for example, have discovered, not sure discovered, but we're in touch with, you've got Martin, people like yourself and Arlene who are academics, very clear about research foundation. We want LLARN to be evidence-based in many ways and to develop that evidence base. But we also want people to celebrate, not in some patronizing, paternalistic way, but to celebrate the contribution of later life members and participants, as well as contribution. If I had a very interested young 7-year-old who was interested in their radio and wanted to be part of this, we'd welcome them with open arms. That's where we want to be. So in terms of involvement at the moment, people just let us know either through Twitter or through LinkedIn or email us, or they contact us via the radio stations that are involved with us. They then can be put on a database. They're invited to join one of the circles that we've got. We've got 4 circles at the moment that are engaged with basically the initial general circle is a steering group. We may well change that down the line. We've got marketing and branding circle. We've got the production circle. But we also need to be developing issues around finance and so on and so forth. And the other thing that we've got to do is we've got to incorporate or not incorporate as a cooperative. So we'll be joining Cooperative UK, but we've got the benefit of some incredibly good cooperators, Sean Welland, for example, to guide us through to become a firmly established cooperative. So watch this space. We obviously welcome Wales. Being half Welsh myself, I am with a name like Mervyn. What else could I be? So we very much welcome the involvement of membership and participants across Wales, Ireland, and Scotland, as well as England. What we don't want to be, and this is what I was really pleased about, is that we don't become South East London centric. So I was absolutely delighted to become engaged and involved, hopefully as an active participant up there in Newcastle. When we had the festival, I'll share this with you. When we had the festival for 2 days, Arlene came up with this brilliant suggestion what we would do in the evening. And she said, we'll have a tour of Newcastle, a walking tour. I said, forget it. There's no way I'm going to walk around Newcastle, on a Thursday, Friday night. So anyway, we are very happy to be very positioned in the north. And Martin, in terms of Rochdale, the birth of the cooperative sector certainly was around the north, around Rochdale, Manchester, in the northeast, northwest. So watch this space. We will be letting people know through our newsletters how to become formal members and to be involved in our circles, and also inviting radio outlets to also become involved. So we've been approached by a number of radio stations that have programs about and for older people. I'll probably leave it at that at the moment, because some of that I just despair, and some of it I absolutely celebrate.
Oh, fascinating. I mean, it is. It seems like there's a tremendous amount of momentum behind it already, which is really encouraging, really exciting. John Pushkin has asked about how it fits with the wider cooperative movement, but I think you've answered that now by saying that you're working with UK Co-op. I would like to then move to although John, if that hasn't answered it, please put in the questions and I'll follow up. But I'd like to move to a question raised by Patricia, who's asked, what is the biggest challenge in regards to engaging people of all demographic and social backgrounds in this cooperative? So how have you reached out to different communities? Have you found any particular challenges in engaging, or is it sort of the same for all different sort of groups that you're working with?
Yeah, so I think we're basically still working on that at the minute. So we're trying to identify people who might want to be involved, but I think it's also I think we were quite lucky that a lot of our membership approached us offering to be members and wanting to contribute. But then, of course, I feel like this is probably a very, very typical issue also with research is, the people who we involve are often already quite civically involved. They're quite active people. So we haven't as a network looked into and kind of encouraging other demographics to become involved. But I know that, for example, some of our members are doing really, really exciting work in kind of approaching people who might not have access to the internet, who might never, even hear about the cooperative. For example, through very community-based radio workshops, teaching older people to, for example, very real-world scenarios, like recording a CV to make, to kind of engage with the technology, but also to have kind of something that could lead to employment. I know that there's a lot of exciting work going on within our member stations. As a network, I think we're certainly still looking into that and who might want to be involved. And yeah, we haven't. I'm not sure if we have got to that point yet where we can think about it, but it's definitely something that I really want to think about, because the potential is huge, and I think we need to be as diverse as possible, and also really be mindful of that digital divide in a way. And I feel like what I've found is that through content creation, through engaging with radio, people automatically become more digitally active. So there are scenarios where somebody might not have, might never use the internet, but then they're producing a show and they want to, download something, and suddenly they start, people start engaging. So I think there's huge potential that we want to look at. Yeah, I don't know if Mervyn wants to add anything to that.
Well, no, I mean, that's covered, Arlene. I think that just to reinforce where we started, and that is, it was born out of community radio. And I think community radio is going through a renaissance at the moment. I think it's becoming incredibly more varied. And I think that people can tune in to community radio, and community radio acts, if you like, the bedrock for us. Then we start to access different cohorts of demographics. And I think that's important to us. I'll be careful. What I'm very anxious that we don't become is some sort of elite, some sort of forum, some sort of network, or even a cooperative that is seen purely through the lens of age and aging, but much wider than that. We want him to challenge, confront, and celebrate. And organisations, whether they be charities, and there's loads out there, lots and lots of organisations, have begun to say to us, we are interested in what you're trying to do. And it's about capturing those. But at the moment, as Arlene indicated, we're building our infrastructure. And that's very, very fragile. There's a few of us involved in the circles, but we certainly do intend over the next 2 to 3 years to become not just the go-to place, but to demonstrate how the narrative and the content around later life can be different.
Excellent, and that really sort of leads me into the question that Bernadette has asked about the point you've made regarding ageism that comes from older adults, really. So again, you pointed out that just because you happen to be older doesn't make you immune to having ageist attitudes, either about yourself, so internalized ageism, or about others. And Bernadette's just asked whether you could say a bit more about how you think this could be addressed. And I think that does lead on from your point about wanting to diversify the network in order to sort of have that multiplicity of voices. So how do you see the role of the network in challenging ageism amongst older adults, as well as the general public more widely?
Yeah, should I handle a bit of that, Arlene, first? Martin, you made reference, and I won't now go into one, but you made reference to the interest in terms of what is called compassionate ageism. We view older people either in terms of dependency, deficit and sickness, that's the framework we use, or we see older adults in their 90s jumping out of aeroplanes on their 100th birthday or walking around their garden. And so it's binary. And I think that what we're trying to create are narratives and examples exploring life courses and life events that shape us, that give us our value base. And through a process, through radio, talk-based, through the publicity, hopefully that we'll generate over time. Hopefully, because I know Tom is very anxious that we, not Captain Tom, I have to say, but Tom Schaff is very anxious that we become an evidence-based entity, that we can start to draw on the research. One of the things I've learned about Age Speaks over the last 130 shows, and you'll know this, Martin, that a lot of our guests have been academics, a lot. Either professors, doctors, students, PhD students. And what I've learned from that is the tremendous coming together to challenge age stereotypes, challenge the status quo. And I think that I'm really looking forward to creating that evidence base and that research that will make us more influential. Why is it that radio broadcasters go to some aging celebrity for a view on old age? They don't talk to me. Not interested. Not interested in the slightest. What I'm interested in are local people in their later years who are talking about their life, their future, and their ambitions, and so on and so forth. I'm also wanting to give them a voice. So in terms of confronting ageism, I still argue that the most insidious, pernicious form of ageism, I can deal with being called an old geezer or an old git. I can deal with that. But what I can't deal with is a social construct of social care, of attitudes towards me that define me in the context of my underlying medical conditions, and I can outline them for you if you wish. But I don't want to be defined as that. I want to be defined on my terms, and that means confronting the compassionate ageism, which is so patronizing, so paternalistic, so destructive, and has stopped us, I would argue, really revolutionizing social care. The work that you've done, Martin, internationally, and others, have had a profound effect on me in terms of thinking broadly, thinking more widely, using different lenses to understand the age and aging and so on and so forth. That's what I hope the network will try and establish and be known for. Yeah, I don't want to be known. I don't want to be known for a music station that churns out music that people think I'm going to enjoy. And you will know, Martin, from your experience, and so will Arlene, and anyone that's appeared on Age Speaks, I never know what music being asked for. Thank God for Ian, who sources it all. When I was interviewed myself, I had the embarrassing of choosing 3 bits of music, all by the wrong artists, singing songs that they never sang. So, talk-based communication, challenge ageism in all its forms, but also, and I think Bernadette's point, I think also the point is well made. The first person we need to think about when we think about ageist attitudes is ourselves. Because all of us, whatever our chronological age, even children of 4 years old, people in their 90s, think about aging in a certain sort of way, which is actually quite demeaning, disempowering, and that's what we hope to challenge.
I think also, just to add to that point, is that just through the notion of older people as producers,
yeah,
we challenge ageism.
Yeah.
So I think it's also the act of content creation, the act of production, that just kind of shifts that stereotype.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, listening to what you guys are doing, it's that sense that people can still learn and people can still grow and get new knowledge. And I think that again is one of the overarching negative narratives around aging. That I mean, someone's put you can teach an old dog new tricks,
Yeah.
but the power of the idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and it seems to be backed up by the sort of pseudoscience of sort of cognitive decline. We all start declining in our 20s or our 30s or all the rest of it, and it's just a slow slope all the way down.
Yeah.
But both my parents were teachers, and the power of education and the value that people can get from learning new things, it gives them a new interest, or kind of gives them that sense of worth and that sense of accomplishment when you do learn something, is incredibly powerful. And I think that's for people to experience that and to kind of say, well, actually, I've learned this new thing. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start in terms of radio and digital. And I love the idea of the radio grab and people learning how to use that technology. I can see that that challenges your internalized ageism that I can't learn. And then from that very small seed, you can start to challenge a whole range of wider societal misconceptions about the sort of the decline of aging. And we see this, we see this in other organizations like the University of the Third Age. There's evidence from those guys in terms of the value they get. We see it in evidence from organizations like Men's Sheds, where older men who've been at risk of depression either learn or re-engage with a skill that they once had. And I think that to me is the thing that cuts across these things. It's that power of learning that I think is really really crucial to challenging this declinist narrative of aging in later life.
Yeah, and also the that sense of productivity. I feel like it's also challenging that, because it doesn't mean that once you hit a certain chronological age you're less productive, or even thinking, why is there that notion of productivity throughout the life course? But I think coming from this very active point of creating something, I think that's also very important, because it kind of counteracts this notion of decline.
And I agree with that, Martin, picking up your point in terms of lifelong learning. The issue for me, and this is disastrous, that repeated governments have raided and laid bare resources into later life learning, where older adults could start to develop skills and renew skills that they had. And the focus, and I understand at one point, on equipping younger generations in terms of employment, that's what's been sacrificed in many ways, is the closure of adult learning centres. And now you've got, it's now within the voluntary sector. You've got, quite rightly, Sam Muga's U3A. But, what opportunities has an older person got to get funding for learning on their terms, to go to university? It excludes so many potential older people who are interested in developing and teaching and so on and so forth. And I just despair of some of the policies that have taken away adult learning and later life learning.
Yeah, there was the whole shift. I can't remember the review. The whole shift to credentials, qualification-based learning. So my dad used to teach night school, and people used to be able to go to learn for the sake of it, and then it all had to be qualification bearing, and they lost so many people. And again, it was all that focus back onto to kind of employment related and youth focused learning. And then we've seen as well I will return to the other stuff, but it is something that sort of bothers me. Even when you had the expansion of kind of apprentices for all ages, we see that the ways in which they are couched tends to be still within kind of people in their sort of early 20s at the very oldest. And so I think providing an opportunity like you guys do for people to learn something new, or maybe people had been radio enthusiasts in an earlier life and earlier in life, and kind of be able to come to this and kind of pick that up again. That passion and that opportunity to learn is, I think, is one of the crucial things that we can put out there in terms of challenging the negative views of aging. I think the other part of what I'm picking up strongly from, and it relates to another question or statement by John, but I think a question as well, is the value of community in all of this. So John has kind of pointed out that the COVID-19 crisis has shown the unsustainability of the attitude towards older adults. That clearly people aren't disposable, or that the threat that has had in terms of the number of care home deaths that have been unrecorded and not dealt with because of the idea that older adults are somehow less than the rest of us. But the positive side, if you like, of COVID, such as there is it's shown the value of community. So there's so many examples of people helping out their neighbours, offering to pick their shopping up. We've seen this huge uptick in people using sort of community-based groups like WhatsApp groups for neighbourhoods, or local trade, apps, people shopping more locally as well. So I wonder, again, I'd be really interested, both in terms of, how you kind of see this in terms of practicality, and Merv said that, the centrality of community-based radio, but also whether when you're doing the evaluation, you're picking up on any sort of community spillover effects, and how that, how this, this network, which, ostensibly is kind of around aging, but actually can kind of have a wider kind of community cohesion effect as well, about talking about community issues, which are sort of, front and center at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to repeat that.
Yeah, I think what you say is very interesting, because it didn't just suddenly the attention wasn't just on kind of WhatsApp groups or community organizing, but also community radio. Suddenly everyone is excited about it. I mean, we were already excited about it, but we really saw that there's quite a lot of funding went into production, but also people suddenly have an interest. But again, often looking at that listener perspective, suddenly we hear things like radio as a lifeline for older people, these sort of things. I think it's extremely exciting to see that suddenly that people realize that there are ways in which you can have your voices heard, and in ways in terms of kind of community. I know that a lot of our member stations are local, so they produce local content for local people. Just naming again Older Voices as an example, who produce content for older people in Newcastle by older people in Newcastle. So I think there is this huge potential for people to get involved with community radio, and I know that community radio stations have worked incredible to keep up the production throughout COVID, throughout the lockdown, in different ways. So I find that also very interesting in terms of how suddenly the production process shifted to more digital ways of engagement, which automatically opens it up as well, because somebody who might not be able to get into a studio, suddenly maybe they can zoom into a conversation. So I think there's huge potentials as well. I don't know if that answered the question, but I feel like it's touching on that community aspect maybe a little bit.
No, I agree. I mean, for me, we need to be clear about what we mean by community. So, bit old hat asking the question, what do you mean by community? But I've been very much taken with the work of Peter Somerville, who talks about beloved communities. And I thought that was a very powerful term in relation to communities, because they can be communities of interest. I would never go near a community of interest that's involved in football. I wouldn't go near it, or do-it-yourself community of interest. But there are communities of interest that would really excite me if I could access them. So I like that notion of being clear about communities of interest, geographical neighbourhood communities, and a whole range of different communities. And I think the other writer that has had a profound impact on our understanding around communities is the work of Paul Mcmuscle in terms of rekindling democracy and so on and so forth. These are writers, academics in one sense, that create narratives, that create evidence, that get us to question, if you like, the fairly patronising, benevolence and gifting approach we have around communities. And that's my debate with the cooperative sector. But if you're serious about care of community in terms of your large principle 7, it's not about benevolence, it's not about gifting, it's about how do you become of the community as a cooperative to release and energize communities of interest, looking at social justice, looking at exclusion, and so on and so forth. And therefore, I think community radio is one way of actually breaking through certain barriers and talking about different language, different narratives, and exciting people to become involved. That's what I'd like to see over the forthcoming years.
I think that's fair. I think that's a really crucial point as well. That I think there's, we've seen it not in relation to older adults in particular, but in relation to sort of community regeneration in the past, with the sort of the late 80s and 90s. Again, like I said, I grew up in Rochdale, which is a very deprived area. I think at one point it had the highest unemployment in the country, and then moving down to South Wales, we've been trying to do work with some communities in the Rhondda Var, which is sort of a deindustrialized area as well, sort of looking at some issues around kind of late life working there. And the stories that we hear from that about community regeneration projects that just parachuted big money, buildings in, built a community centre, but didn't do anything to empower people in those communities to really kind of do it for themselves. And then as soon as the money dries up, or as soon as the funding goes, they're just left with this big white elephant. So you really, it is that switch of ideas, isn't it? It's about working with, not working for communities, and kind of helping them to become self-sufficient. And I agree with you. I think, there's been a big shift to the local. We see it in the COVID, situation. We see the rise of mayors of, cities in the US who are, taking on, the president. We see the rise of mayors and devolution in the UK, and I know that's a sort of a higher level, but it's moving away from that centralized structure, and the community then becomes a really crucial element of that. So I think it's super, important to reposition community radio in that. And again, I'd just say it'd be really interesting to see if you could capture some of that wider kind of spillover within that geographical community in terms of that feeling of empowerment, and how, like you said, someone who goes in to this network and learns about, oh, actually I can learn new stuff, I can do this, that then their civic participation, their social participation spills out into other activities. Oh, maybe I can do that, maybe I can be involved in these other areas as well. So I think it's potential to have a much wider, in and of itself it's amazing, but I think there's potential there for it to have a much wider benefit as well, which is truly sort of empowering. So I am going to see if people have other questions. I could talk to Arlind and Mervyn for hours, but I realise that there are other people in the room who should also have a chance to say so. So if you do have any questions, please do put them on the question box thing, and I can read them out.
Maybe also just to say again, because I had a reminder that I should show our contact details, but then I can't see Mervyn and Martin, so I prefer if you just email us if you have any questions. It's larnnetwork@gmail.com. So it's LLARN @work@gmail.com. So you can always reach us there as well. And maybe if I can just add something that Martin just said about kind of this potential impact that we can make. I'm also excited for it on so many levels, because I think I'm very excited on this social level that you just mentioned, but I'm equally excited about I think it could potentially become quite powerful in terms of policy development. So I think on a political level, and the whole activism part of it, as well as the social impact. So I think I'm personally excited about all of these, things that could result out of it if people put their energy towards it.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, Martin, just to reinforce that, I think this issue of older adults civic and civil participation through community radio, through audio, has got so much potential to shift narratives, rather than necessarily through a local, controlled older people's forum. And I'm not decrying older people's forums. I've been engaged with them too long. But it's about opening that up, because what you get is you get a group that think they speak on behalf of the whole older adult population in their area. So if be careful here, but if I happen to be the chair of an older people's forum here in Epping or in Romford, you get surrounded by a group who set the agenda, talk to the local elected members, and they say, I talk on behalf of all older people in Romford or in Epping. It's rubbish. It's destructive. But if you can open that up through the medium of radio or other mediums, you're hearing different voices. You're hearing different takes, different experiences.
I see that also just occurred to me as well, but another real value in this. I think one of the things that struck me since moving to Wales, and I've been here 3 years now at Swansea, there's so much activity going on in this country around aging late life, so much good stuff. It really is mind-blowing. But one of the things I hear a lot, one of the things I see a lot, is that so little, or not as much as should be, gets joined up. So you have, community groups, and part of this is the geography of Wales. Sometimes it is almost impossible to get from one valley to the next. So groups doing things in different parts of the country aren't always aware of what's going on elsewhere. So some of that experience and that expertise gets lost. Some of those really good initiatives don't really kind of move outside the locality. So having that radio network where actually, people can hear about what's going on in Powys, in, Pembrokeshire, and say, oh, that's good. Maybe we could do that here. Again, the opportunity to sort of that sort of translocal sharing of information, which is very difficult to do in physical forums. I mean, it takes 4.5 hours to get from South Wales to North Wales. So it's often difficult for us and our colleagues in Bangor to really know what we're doing together. So, how you do that across the country as a whole. So again, although it's locally based, because you've digitized it, it has the opportunity to be global. Just like East London Radio, you and I had a nice chat. I mean, I wasn't able to get out to East London. We had a nice chat, in East London, but people listen to it around the world. And, that's that shift from the local to the global, which obviously fascinates me, given my research interest. Again, I see as being really powerful.
That's part of what we aimed for, isn't it? Is to create this hub where we showcase the productions from across England, or well, for now it's across England. I have this vision to go global, but I think that's kind of what we're trying to achieve with the Mixcloud hub at the moment. That if people are interested in this is the place to go.
And I think, there's another layer to this for me, Martin. I think we've all come across some incredibly innovative, activities, organisations, really mind-blowing. But when you come to think about how do you, even if you've heard of them, how do you scale up those initiatives in such a way that they are able to be, if you like, funded? And then you get into this other issue of funders not overly keen on often looking at sustainability, scaling up. And I'm thinking, for example, certainly in Wales, I've been bowled over by the work of Jewish Choice at Aberystwyth University, that is looking at later life victims of domestic violence. Phenomenal work, evidence-based. Sarah and the team there but who's wanting to invest in developing that sort of approach and partnership working across Wales and beyond Wales? Funders often reframe the very initiative that's put a bid in. They'll reframe it. If you do this, if you focus a bit on that, we'll give you some money. And often that undermines the very purpose and the very foundation on which those innovations were determined. So in that sense, I worry about the ageism that exists with funders in particular. I won't mention them, but the very large funders are often just locked into this paradigm of dependency, sickness, deficit, poor older people who really do need to be supported and helped. We need to be knocking on their doors and talking to them about loneliness. And I've promised myself I wouldn't mention this word, but there again, I've failed totally. And yet, if you talk to people and you think about different ways of approaching, it's not always attractive. It's not always well, I've said enough. But it takes a point further, Martin, around these initiatives on why they don't get scaled up, why they don't expand. And often that's because those with the purse strings, those in power to give and take away, are nowhere near even understanding what it is that those organisations are trying to
I would entirely concur, and I had a conversation a few weeks ago with a major funder, and it was that. It's just, you know, there's still the paradigm of the social problem paradigm around aging. So unless it's a problem, it's not going to get funded. So it plays into that negative discourse. So, but you know, stuff like this can challenge that. I know I have another good sort of question, practical question again from John, who does point out.
John Putkin?
Yes.
Yeah, tell John it's nice to have him on, but he's said enough now.
I think he might. I think he might be a plant in the audience.
Martin, rest him. We'll just rest him. Hello, John. Lovely to have you.
But for those older people that don't have access to computers or the internet, how can they get involved?
With the network or with community radio?
I think with both, really. I mean,
well, I think community radio, you don't need to have internet access, right? You just go to your local community radio station, and it will happen in the studio. And that's what I mentioned earlier. That's this really exciting opportunity that using kind of, a very low tech way of engaging with digital tech. So kind of starting with radio production in the studio and then slowly building it up. You know, you might want to do a bit of research. You might, get involved with the internet, with digital technology in general. So I think there's this very exciting idea of using something low tech and then skilling up from that. And in terms of our cooperative, everything is happening online. This is very much because of the lockdown now. So we just had to shift everything into Zoom meetings or other ways of engaging online. And so, yeah, I'm afraid that might be.
Sorry, Ollie.
No, go for it, Mervyn.
No, I'm just going to say John makes a very good point. And therefore, I think we do need to be mindful whether things will change over the foreseeable future with the government's intention to upscale broadband and so on and so forth. But it's a fair point. And also going back to an earlier comment that was made, and that is, what is our later life audience? Sonda Radio, for example, are very clearly looking at older people within often care settings, and that's brilliant. But I think that we do need, and I think community radio can do this in many ways, touch a whole range of different audiences of people. But yeah, John makes a good point.
Yeah,
and
it's
now you can rest in, Martin.
It's a very good point. But yeah, I think I just wanted to highlight that community radio, when it's studio based, when there's no lockdown, there shouldn't be a digital barrier.
I think that's, like you said, the real attraction of this. It is, you know, anyone can go there, anyone can get involved, you know, and then through that, then, you know, they can maybe learn the digital skills through the capture, and then that might give them the confidence to kind of become more kind of engaged in other digital forms of communication or participation. So it's a lovely virtuous circle that you guys are kind of, you know, creating at the moment. And again, you know, to be doing all this with the you know, the strictures of lockdown placed upon you is even more admirable. So as we are getting to 1:30, and now that John is out of the game, we might be out of.
Has he switched off? Has he left the building? Can I just add there, Martin, that John we know very well. John is a member of the Co-Operative, and he's a very active member. And I've known John for 40 years, which is why I can tease him.
Very active member of this webinar, which is brilliant. I think he's asked most of the questions. If anyone does, I will wrap this up now, because you know, I think you've done an amazing job. Thank you so much. But I do get as well that, you know, you guys are probably spending even more time than me in front of your computers at the moment with various meetings, and it is quite demanding. I find them, you know, I have to have a little lie down after each one. But this has been amazing. Really, really pleased to hear about how well it's going. Really pleased to hear about this initiative. If people have other questions, like Arlene said, either drop them an email through their email. I think we will probably make the details available through the CADA network if people want to, if people can't remember what you've said. Otherwise, if people are on Twitter, Late Life Aging Radio Network is active on Twitter, as is Merv and Arlene as well. So get onto them, or get in contact through CADA and we can pass your details on. So I would really like to thank both the speakers, Arlene and Mervyn. Thank you very much for taking the time out to come and talk to us. Like I said, it's been a real joy, actually, really kind of powerful and empowering webinar to be part of. I'd like to thank all the participants who have again taken the time out to be with us today and I did see we had people from all over the country as well. So again, I'm really pleased that we're able to use this forum as well to kind of get a nice wide-ranging audience. So with that, I would just say thank you. And if Ree or Catherine could close the session, that'd be wonderful. Cool.
Thank you very much, Martin, and well done. Well done.
Thank you both very much.
Lovely to see you again.
You too, both of you. Yeah, and yeah, stay safe.